So my books are a right mess. I've been trying to organise all my classics. In this video I'm determined to get my bookshelves organised. I have a big bookcase which you can see books are literally falling off. I also have a smaller bookcase in my room as well. All the time periods of literature are muddled. It really isn't helping my DIY literature degree study. So for my DIY literature degree, the first thing I did in my notebook was this. I researched what time periods there were. This is my notebook that I put everything in for my DIY literature degree. You can see it says eras of literature, and I worked out the dates and the time frames so that I could plan modules of reading around these time frames in history. I really wanted to develop an understanding of that literary landscape through time, from the medieval, Old English, through the Renaissance, through the Romantic and the Regency period, through the Victorian, and all the way up through the Edwardian, modernism, early modern, postmodernism to contemporary. The first thing I discovered doing this was a lot of the dates kind of crisscross, and some timelines are slightly different than others. You can see this one has a little bit more detail. It's got additional information in there. You can see here that the Romantic period is split into early and later, so timelines are different. I would say if you are interested in planning literary reading around the eras of literature, just collect a few of these timelines and write them down. You can see over the page here, this is another timeline. I copied this one down because it gave key authors as well. But you can see there's whole units of time here that are completely different on this timeline. So just get a collection, get a overview of your timeline, and then you can start planning. So my bookcases of classics have got completely muddled. I've got too much Victorian literature to fit now on my little bookcase, and I want all of these time frames organised. I want to see what I've got for each time period of literature. I want to be able to go to a shelf and just know that that's Edwardian or that's Victorian. So what I've decided to do, I'm going to write down those different time periods on pieces of paper. We're going to put this on the floor and we're going to sort everything. I'm going to check that I know first publication date for every single book I own, and I'm going to write in the front cover what that date is and what time period it belongs to, and then we're going to sort this out. Oh my goodness, I've just tipped everything off this bookcase apart from this top shelf, because I know all of this is Victorian, and also this second shelf down, this is my Jane Austen shelf and Anne Radcliffe, a few others. I know that this is Regency or Romance, so I'm going to leave these where they are. This bottom shelf, I found some rogue fairy tale books. If you watched my Organise My Bookshelves Shelf 1 video, you will see that I took my fairy tale books downstairs to a shelf downstairs. I knew I was missing this book. This is Gossip from the Forest, a book where the forest is character. I can't wait to read this one. I knew I was missing that, but it was just lost in amongst the mess. So there's another one here, The Forest in Folklore and Mythology, that's to go downstairs. The Oxford Companion for Fairy Tales, that's to go downstairs. The Hard Facts about Grimm's Fairy Tales, again downstairs. And this beautiful hardback copy of Folklore, Woodlands and Forests, all to go downstairs. Okay, so here we go. I have put the slips on the floor. I have vacuumed, although it doesn't look like it. They are going round from earliest to latest, and there I've got all the way up to contemporary. So here we go. This is everything that I tipped off the bookcase. I'm just going to sort it into piles, guys, and just see what I've got the most of. I suspect that I've got the most Victorian. In fact, I know I've got the most Victorian fiction, I just know. It looks like I've got so many books, but then I suppose I do. So this is now the view from my chair. I still have all the Victorian books on here. I've still got Victorian books up there. I've still got the Jane Austen shelf here. But now I've got some timelines. Let me show you what I found. So we'll go to the very earliest pile of books. There's only one in here, Renaissance, 1500 to 1660. I've only got Don Quixote. We go to neoclassical, which is 1660 to 1785. I've got the Pilgrim's Progress, Daniel Defoe Roxana, I've got Gulliver's Travels, and Samuel Richardson's Pamela. So I've got 4 books in that time period. Coming up to Regency and Romantic combined, so that's 1785 to 1837 window, with that sort of 9-year window in amongst that for Regency. I've got James Hogg, The Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner. This could actually go with my Gothic reading, to be honest, which is kept in a separate place. I've got Rob Roy, Sir Walter Scott, which I found in Stratford-upon-Avon. I've got Washington Irving, Tales of the Alhambra, which has the most glorious old-fashioned plates in it. There's one right on the first page. Isn't that fabulous? I've got Matthew Lewis, The Monk. Again, that could go with my Gothic fiction. I'm not sure yet whether I'm going to separate the Gothic out. And then I have a collection of works by Mary Shelley, which was one of those really disappointing buys that you think is going to be a great book, and it just came and it was just that. So what I've done with these books, while I was sorting them, I googled when they were first published or written, and I've put that information in the very first page of each book. So this one was written in 1829, first published in 1832, belongs to the Romantic period, and I've put on the cusp of late and early Romantic, so it kind of goes between the two. And you can see again FP for first published, 1824 Romantic, and then if we come to here, 1678 Neoclassical. So I've got dates in the front if I want to double check. Now for Victorian that aren't already on my shelves, I'd got Charlotte Bronte, The Professor, Three Men in a Boat, Anthony Trollope, Thomas Hardy, Far from the Madding Crowd, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and you can see, look, first published 1876 Victorian. I've got The Sign of Four by Arthur Conan Doyle. I have Mark Twain, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and I've got 2 editions of that, and another The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. I've got Oscar Wilde's play Salome, Dina Craik's Olive. Then I've got a collection of Alan Rain books, because she was a Welsh writer. So I've managed to find Gothowen, A Story of a Welsh Homestead. There's also Torn Sails, A Tale of a Welsh Village. And in here somewhere there's one that I want to read first, A Welsh Witch. Now this is the only book that didn't quite fit in the Victorians. Look, it was first published in 1902, so this was the first year of the Edwardians, but I'm going to keep her in the Victorian pile just because her body of work really was in the Victorian era. So I've got Amy Levy, The Romance of a Sharp, Wuthering Heights, and Jane Eyre. I've got Crime and Punishment. I found, okay, I know it's not really Victorian because it's not set in the right place. This is Russian literature, but it's still of that time frame. Kate Chopin, The Awakening. I was surprised that that was Victorian. I didn't think it was, and I've double checked and triple checked, but it's saying that it was written between 1897 and 1898 and first published in 1899. So, and Treasure Island, I didn't think that was Victorian either. Now this one, I found this for like 20p in a charity shop. This is the Vicomte de Bragelonne Volume 2 by Damas. I just saw Damas and saw this beautiful edition and grabbed it. But I did a bit of research while I was sorting out dates. This is what I found. It was written and serialised in French between 1847 and 1850, which puts it in that Victorian time period. This novel is also known as 10 Years Later because it is volume 2 of this title. And I found out that it's part of a 6-novel series to do with the Three Musketeers. So the 6 novels rather in order are the Three Musketeers, 20 Years Later, the Vicomte de Bragelonne, 10 Years Later, which is this book. Then you've got Louis de la Valera. Sorry, my French is not good with my Birmingham accent. And then the last book is The Man in the Iron Mask. I didn't even know what I'd bought, but I do now. And then we have classic slave narratives. Now these were written, I put a note in here, classic slave narratives primarily written between 1830 and 1860, so that makes it Victorian as well. So those are my Victorian books that were kind of muddled in the mix. They're all ready to be put on a bookshelf. Edwardian, so just the 9 years of Edwardian fiction. I've only got 4. I've got Father and Son, written by Edmund Gosse. I've got a Joseph Conrad, Nostromo. I've got a J.K. Chesterton, The Nonsense Verse. And I've got an E.M. Forster, Howard's End, which I thought was Victorian, but it isn't. This is my pile of modern books. So I've got The Catcher in the Rye, my Virginia Woolf that I found, so A Room of One's Own. I've also found Between the Acts. Somewhere as well I've got To the Lighthouse. Hemingway I found, For Whom the Bell Tolls. Modern Baptists. I found an F. Scott Fitzgerald, This Side of Paradise. Flora Thompson, Lark Rise to Candleford is modern. My Antonia by Willa Cather, that's modern. One Pair of Hands by Monica Dixon is modern. D.H. Lawrence, The Rainbow is modern. Robert Graves, Goodbye to All That is modern. And Ford Madox Ford, The Good Soldier is also modern. So that makes up my modern pile. The biggest pile of all is postmodern, which is 1939 to the 2000s. So in this pile I've got Aldous Huxley, Island. I have John Williams, Butcher's Crossing. Now John Williams wrote Stoner, which I read years and years ago, but I managed to find Butcher's Crossing in a charity shop. The Colour Purple by Alice Walker is postmodern. Then I found a load of Anya Seton for 10p each in a 10p box. So I've got The Winthrop Woman. I've also got Devil Water by her as well. Toni Morrison, Beloved, which I found in a charity shop. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? That's postmodern. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude. This one I am dying to read, but that belongs with the postmodern. This lovely book is The Houses in Between. That's a Howard Spring book. I found George Orwell, 1984, if I want to reread that one. I found recently Higher Ground by Carol Phillips. This is a series of short stories, edition of To Kill a Mockingbird, which I still haven't read. Varlam Shalamov, Colma Tales. What else have we got? We've got a vintage edition here. This is W.E. Bowman, The Ascent of Rumdoodle. We've got a couple more of these incredible old vintage Penguin books, postmodern Penguin. So The L-Shaped Room and Be Ready with Bells and Drums. I just love the covers of those. Then I found a load of Doris Lessing. Now I haven't read her. I could do like a week of Doris Lessing because I've got a few books. So I've got The Grass is Singing. I've got The Fifth Child. And I've also got The Golden Notebook. I love that cover. Now these were a surprise as well. I found these in a charity shop and I thought that they looked kind of a bit like a Trollope front cover. All by Nora Lofts. This is a trilogy and they were all there. I mean, look at that one. That one's slightly different, but I just thought, wow. And I thought these were Victorian, but they're postmodern. So they were first published 1962. This is the first book of the trilogy. There was a weirdness going on with the dates because it said the first book was 1962, but the second book was 1961. So I'm just classing that it's somewhere early 1960s. So we've got House at Sunset is the first book, The House at Old Vine is the second book, and The Townhouse is the third book. Finally, we've got another version of To Kill a Mockingbird, and this one was in a 10p clearance trolley outside of the charity shop, which I bought a load of leather-bound Dickens for 10p each. And this is Frederick Forsyth, The Day of the Jackal. So a really nice edition here. There he is. There's the man himself. So that's all my postmodern books. Now contemporary, these are going to have to go somewhere else. So I've just finished and I am really pleased with it. So that is now not Victorian fiction. All of my Victorian fiction, can you believe I've got enough Victorian fiction to fill a bookcase? So nice to get this all sorted. So on the top I've got all of my Oxford World Classics. So there's things like Gaskell, we've got George Gissing, there is old-fashioned Oxford World Classics there, Adam Bede. Got some Dickens in Oxford World Classics. I've also stuck with the white spines and put the New Oxford Book of Victorian Verse up there, and that is a Wilkie Collins that I found a few weeks ago in a charity shop. And then here I've got probably my favourite editions, the old-fashioned Penguin with this picture on the spine. I love reading from these editions. So I've got Dombey and Son in that edition. I've got Wilkie Collins. I've just finished reading The Old Curiosity Shop, so I loved that. More Dickens. Villette, my favourite novel of the year so far. Got some Trollope, Treasure Island. Hardy, A Pair of Blue Eyes. That is our Hardy read-along book for next month, so that is about to come off the shelf and to be read. Elizabeth Gaskell, Lois the Witch, loved this. Some more Anthony Trollope, and the Yellow Wallpaper, that's about to come off as well to be read for next month. And I thought for little knickknacks I would put my Arthur Conan Doyle Hound of the Baskervilles book, which I bought in the Sherlock Holmes Museum a couple of weeks ago when I went on a trip to London. And I've got my little swan up there. So that is the top shelf. If we come down to the next shelf, my trinkets, I've got a little Dickensian doll. I've got a little candle holder. I've got this vintage edition of The Cloister and the Hearth, which I think is absolutely gorgeous. Over on this corner, I've got all of my Thomas Hardy that I've been buying second hand for the Hardy read along. Now, you can see that I bought a whole load of new books because I loved these Macmillan covers so much and I wanted to track them all down. Now you can see that some of them are battered, but honestly guys, I just think they're just so kitsch, and I just thought if I can find them cheap, I'm gonna get them all in this Macmillan edition. I even found, look, the poems, New Wessex selection of Thomas Hardy poetry in that edition. I think this is my all-time favourite book cover ever. So Far from the Madding Crowd in this Macmillan edition. So I will do another Thomas Hardy video at some point and share all those new covers because I just think they're fabulous. So I've got the Count of Monte Cristo waiting. There's another version of The Mayor of Casterbridge, Victorian Ghost Stories, Charles Dickens' The Christmas Books. I've got The Heir of Redcliffe there by Charlotte M. Young. There's another Wilkie Collins, No Name. Loads of you have recommended this one to me. I've been trying to find the Barchester Chronicles, but next to nothing secondhand. I think I've got them all now. Anthony Trollope's Dr. Wurtle's School, I read that a couple of months ago. That was my first ever Trollope that I read, which I loved. Got Rachel Ray waiting to be read. And then some of these old world classics, The Half Sisters and Marion Fay as well, which is a Trollope. And there's the first of the Barchester Chronicles, The Warden, waiting to be read. So that is shelf 2. If we come down to shelf 3, we've got more Dickensian dollies. And I've got all my Penguin Black Spine. So there's Kate Chopin, The Black Tulip, which is a historical Victorian novel which I want to read. Vanity Fair. That's another Wilkie Collins that you guys recommended. So I've got that. I found that when I was getting my hair cut. There's Thomas Hardy, The Return of the Native in Penguin. Elizabeth Gaskell's Ruth, which I've got planned to read in December. Anthony Trollope, he knew he was right. That has been bought for my Women and Marriage study. North and South. Oh my gosh, I loved reading that book this year. And then there's Cranford. So lots of Elizabeth Gaskell on here. Bleak House, an absolute favourite. Then Anne Bronte, which I absolutely adored reading. There's some George Eliot. This Great Expectations, is an adventure coming with this one, and I think that's planned for October. Picture of Dorian Gray, I read last November and loved it. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, I read that this year and loved it. I moved this little doll out the way. So, there is a beautiful edition of The Professor. Look at that cover, which I found secondhand. Isn't that gorgeous? A second edition of David Copperfield. So these are all the old-fashioned Wordsworth classics. You can see I got a Tess of the D'Urbervilles in a Wordsworth classic. And then on there's Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. There's some more Sherlock Holmes. There is some more Trollope and more George Eliot. This is the Little Alan Raines section that I showed you, and also The Romance of a Shop by Amy Levy. So that is shelf number 3, all organised. And if we come down here to the very bottom shelf, so I've got my Red Spine vintage editions, and the very first Charles Dickens I ever read, I just loved that. It was this David Copperfield, this Tale of Two Cities, which I've also read, and the Pickwick Papers that set me off on Victorian literature. I found those 3 all together for £2 in a charity shop, and I thought, well, I found Charles Dickens now, I may as well just start with Charles Dickens and Victorian fiction. So I've still got the Pickwick Papers to read out of those initial 3 finds. That's planned for December, so I know when I'm reading that. A vintage edition of Wuthering Heights, which I love. This is my money box, which I've had forever. This is Penny Clip Clop, so I'll move her across. Woman in White I read earlier. I've got some vintage covers for Wilkie Collins, and then I've got that Dumas, some more Brontes, and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer in hardback. So that is the bottom shelf. So I think that is a much nicer organisation of my Victorian literature, and I'm just really pleased with how it looks. I can see what I've got. Now just to read it, I mean, I am reading it and I'm loving every second of it. There's a lot to read, but I tell you what, guys, shopping secondhand, none of that broke the bank. I normally get 3 books for £1 in my charity shops here, so I haven't done too badly with that bookcase. So I'm coming over to my little bookcase now. Now I've seen how much Victorian fiction I've got. I understand now why this bookcase was bursting at the seams and couldn't cope. So what I've done, I've started on the bottom shelf and I've put the earliest books on the bottom shelf. So My one Renaissance book here, Don Quixote, is there. Then I've got my neoclassical books, those four there. The Regency and Romantic period is here. So now we hit Sir Walter Scott, we hit Anne Radcliffe, we hit all my Jane Austen novels. So hopefully these three Anne Radcliffes will be read by the end of the year. I'm currently reading Emma and absolutely loving it. So that's like a nice collection of Radcliffe, Jane Austen and some earlier works. Up onto this shelf as well, I've got sort of my books around Jane Austen, so retellings or non-fiction books about Jane Austen or study books about Jane Austen. I've also got like biographies of Jane Austen. There's a biography of Mary Shelley there and Frankenstein. And then this pile starts the Edwardian books. So just the 4 books I've got in the Edwardian era. And then we come up on these top 2 shelves. That's for modern. At this point it becomes postmodern. And that top shelf there is postmodern as well. I had quite a few vintage editions of postmodern and all the Doris Lessing I've put together. I've started piling the Anna Seton together. I've got my 2 versions of To Kill a Mockingbird there. I've got Virginia Woolf, Ernest Hemingway, Ford Madox Ford. This is all my modern literature. And like I said, that's where postmodern starts. So I do need, I think, to get some little signposts for the time eras for my bookcase. I might try and make something just to keep it all separate, but I really like the way that's organised. I think if you are doing a DIY literature degree and you're trying to get a feel for the landscape of literature, I think that's what organising your bookshelves like this does. It gives you a feel for that timeline and that landscape, like this became that and then that became this. That's one of the key things I want to get from studying literature. I want to know that time frame and to get a feel for it, like to really feel how literature changed over time. So I think organising my bookshelves like this will be fantastic. So I've been studying Victorian literature all this year. Next year I'm going to study Regency and Romantics. I've got it here now ready to go, and I can also see where there are gaps where I need a few more books. I certainly do not have gaps with the amount of Victorian fiction I've got. You can see that's what I've been searching for this year, and yeah, I've done really well. So that's it, guys. The contemporary books I'm going to take downstairs or into my doll room library and try and make space in there. But that's it for now. The timelines of my DIY literature degree, organised, a lot more easy to find. And if you're wondering what this is up here on the top of this little bookcase, that is all my non-fiction study and autobiographies around Victorian fiction up there. So thanks guys so much for keeping me company. It's just really nice to have some company, and I hope you enjoyed watching me sort my shelves. Now just to take some more books downstairs, which I'll share in another video, but I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.